Have you ever pondered the intricate complexities of the African slave trade? The stories we often hear are those of Europeans and Americans, but what of the Africans who sold their own people into bondage? Our journey begins in the early days of human civilization, tracing the threads of this heart-wrenching narrative. In the 15th century, the concept of slavery was not new to Africa. Indigenous tribes had been practicing forms of servitude for centuries. The Yoruba people of West Africa, for example, often enslaved prisoners of war, turning them into domestic and agricultural laborers. This form of slavery was different from what we typically understand it to be, as it was not based on race or ethnicity, but rather on power dynamics and conflict. As we move into the 16th century, the dynamics began to change. The arrival of European explorers and traders transformed the African slave trade into a profitable enterprise. African leaders and merchants began selling their captives to European buyers. It's essential to understand that this was not a uniform practice across the continent. Some African societies resisted the trade, while others saw it as an opportunity for wealth and power. The 17th and 18th centuries marked the height of the transatlantic slave trade. Millions of Africans were forcibly transported across the Atlantic to the Americas and the Caribbean. The African slave traders, often powerful tribal leaders, played a significant role in this process. They captured individuals from rival tribes during conflicts and sold them to European slave traders. As we enter the 19th century, the tide began to turn. The abolitionist movement gained momentum in Europe and America, leading to the eventual outlawing of the slave trade. Despite this, internal slave trade within Africa continued. It was not until the 20th century, under pressure from international communities, that African nations began to outlaw slavery in their territories. In retrospect, the African slave trade is a complex web of power, greed, and exploitation. It's a story of Africans selling other Africans, woven into the fabric of our shared human history. The key points to remember are 1. Slavery in Africa predates European involvement and was initially a product of tribal conflicts and power dynamics. 1. The arrival of European traders in the 16th century transformed the African slave trade into a commercial enterprise. 1. The height of the transatlantic slave trade in the 17th and 18th centuries saw millions of Africans sold into bondage by their fellow Africans. 1. Despite the abolition of the slave trade in the 19th century, internal slavery in Africa continued into the 20th century. In understanding this history, we expose the underbelly of human nature and the lengths to which individuals will go for power and wealth. It is a sobering reminder of our capacity for cruelty, but also of our ability to change and seek justice. As we continue to delve into our shared past, we must remember these stories and learn from them to ensure we do not repeat the mistakes of our ancestors.